Hey everyone, welcome back to Jillian On Love, where I discuss all things relationships, primarily romantic relationships, our relationship with ourselves, and sometimes our relationships with friends and family. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because when you do, it makes it so that I can keep creating this content and helping all of you. And as always, thank you for being here. I have gotten a lot of requests to do a podcast on how to heal your relationship with your parent, whether it's a narcissistic parent, an alcoholic parent, or any parent where your needs were not met. And if you are an adult and you've been carrying around this pain or this grief or this anger or all of the above towards a parent, and you don't want it to control you anymore, and you don't want it to control your relationships, then this is the episode for you. I truly believe that some of maybe the most intense, quote unquote, spiritual work that we are tasked with is how to make peace with our parents or a parent. This obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but there are many people who have a relationship with one parent, sometimes both, but more often it's one parent that is very challenging. And learning how to make peace with our parents so that, like I said, it doesn't control us anymore, and it doesn't, and our relationship with them doesn't control our romantic relationships, doesn't control our career, doesn't control our life choices, is, like I said, one of the most difficult things to do. My father, when I was a very young child, came out with a best-selling book that put him on the map as one of the most highly regarded psychiatrists in the world. And that book was called The Difficult Child. The Difficult Child was based on me. I was a difficult child, and he talked about me in it, and he named my name. And so I, throughout my life, was walking around with this belief that I was difficult. It was part of my identity. And it's something that infiltrated every part of my life, for better and for worse. It definitely motivated me in ways that maybe I wouldn't be motivated before, to prove myself, to achieve whatnot. But more than not, it in many ways damaged the way that I saw myself. In addition to that, my father was a brilliant man, but a very troubled man. And he passed away close to 2 years ago now, about a year and, 9 months ago now. And when I was growing up, he struggled with a severe form of bipolar. And because he didn't know that that's what he had, and because he was a psychiatrist, which means he's a medical doctor and can prescribe medication, he self-prescribed a lot of medication to regulate himself. He also depended on alcohol to regulate himself. He was married to my mother, who they were both immigrants, and my mom didn't really have the self-esteem that she needed to have. And it was a pretty abusive marriage. There was a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of emotional abuse. And, if you're living in a household with someone bipolar who's not in any way regulated and it's not diagnosed, it's incredibly difficult. In addition to that, he was a diagnosed narcissist. And so what that means is that he was very focused on himself, had a very hard time taking responsibility for anything, blamed others for his problems, and had a very difficult time seeing outside of himself. I was born incredibly sensitive. Now, if you're someone who was born very, very sensitive, so you had a sensitive nervous system, and then you are raised in a family where there's a lot of emotional volatility. Maybe your parents, like my parents, had a bad marriage, right? And they were always fighting. Or one or both of your parents had a substance abuse issue, or one or both of your parents was narcissistic, or just not really present with you, or maybe very volatile. When you combine the unpredictability of a parent and their moods with a highly sensitive child, what you get is a recipe for a lot of suffering for the child. And then that child grows up feeling pretty unsafe and needing to have a lot of reassurance and emotional safety. Now, what I recognize and what's really interesting is that siblings can grow up in the same household and have a completely different childhood, because so one person could be born at a time when their parents were actually in a very good place in their marriage. And then their sibling could have been born at a time where their parents were in a very bad place in their marriage. And so sibling one is born into an environment where there's a lot of love, and sibling two is born into an environment where there's a lot of volatility. Not only that, we are born with a certain proclivity in terms of our nervous system. Some people are actually born more sensitive. Some people are born with just a less sensitivity. And what I mean by sensitivity, I mean by being highly aware of your environment, maybe being sensitive to loud noises. And I'm not even talking about neurodivergence right now. Of course, that would be on the extreme side of sensitivity, but you do not have to be neurodivergent to be highly sensitive. You can be highly sensitive and not anywhere on the spectrum, but still have a high degree of sort of sensitivity. So that child needs a lot of routine. That child needs a lot of predictability. A third factor in all of this is that sometimes a child is born into a family and their personality and their nervous system is so different than the rest of their family that the family has a hard time relating to that child, and the child also has a hard time relating to the family. And so the child feels like they don't entirely belong. And so then they start to feel a little bit like the quote unquote black sheep. So I share all of this with you because there are so many dynamics that can happen inside of a family. And if you are someone who, maybe because of your sensitivity, maybe because of just like you having a vastly different personality than your parent, or maybe you just clash with one of your parents so much because, I don't know, maybe you're really outspoken and you can like see through like the facade, and you just, and you can just tell that there's something off with your parent. Maybe you're really, really sensitive to their moods in a way that maybe someone else is not as sensitive. If that is happening, then what's going to happen is that you are going to have a very troubled relationship with your parent. And all these things played a role. It was the way my father, it was also generational. My father was not of a generation where the father is emotionally available to their child. The father is more removed. I was raised in a time, and my father was of a culture and generation that doesn't change diapers, right? So there isn't a whole lot of bonding that is happening at a very young age. My father was also highly intellectual, so every conversation was highly intellectual, and I never felt really safe to open up to him. It just was not the vibe. Even though my adult romantic relationships, there were actually quite a few that did not mimic that at all. My marriage, which I talk about in my book, It Begins With You, definitely was indicative of the things that I had not healed in my relationship with my father. I decided at 23 years old to never answer his calls again. I ended up answering his calls, but it took about 13 years. And so I decided to be estranged from him. And at first, it gave me a sense of relief that I didn't have to speak to him because I felt so uncomfortable in his presence. He would often give a lot of passive aggressive jabs. I never knew like what mood he would be in. Like, to give you some reference, when my parents told me and my sister that they were divorcing and my father was moving out, this was when I was around 11 years old, I was happy. I was so relieved. Now, there was never any physical abuse, but I just felt incredibly unsafe. And I was very scared of him. Now, my sister's relationship with him was not a whole lot better, but she didn't have that extreme fear. And I had extreme fear of him. Plus, my personality is, you kind of know where you stand with me. I'm not going to, if I'm upset with you or I don't like you, like you're going to know. And with my sister, it's just she's not as forward with her opinions as I am. So we were like oil and water. But again, I was so terrified of him. I write in one of the last chapters of my book that I always thought that I was allergic to my father. And the truth is, I was just a highly sensitive child. He had a darkness that he was not in control of. And I felt his darkness on such a visceral level, and I did not know how to handle it. I thought that the solution was to never speak to him again because I was too afraid to actually have boundaries with him. I did not have the toolkit. I did not have the tools to lay down boundaries with him. I didn't have the tools to say anything to him, like, don't do that, or I don't like that, or why are you like that? And I didn't feel like it was safe to anyway. So my solution was estrangement. But as the years went on and I reached my 30s, I realized that the estrangement was actually not a solution because it weighed on me. It was something that it was like the ultimate form of avoidance. And look, I know there's some of you who may have some estrangement because you have to for your physical safety, for your safety. So this is, I understand that there are various scenarios, and some of you are watching this with much more intense stories than mine. This episode is sponsored by O Positive. O Positive is a women's health company that offers a range of symptom-targeted supplements that support women at every stage of life, from her first period to well beyond her last. And they have a best-selling product. They have many, actually. And the one that I want to focus on is Uro. These are vaginal probiotics, and it's one of the top 5 supplements on Amazon. And what's so special about it is that it is a probiotic blend specifically formulated to support vaginal health, healthy pH, healthy flora. Because we know, ladies, many factors, sex, tight clothing, sweat, hormones, stress, periods, all of it can disrupt vaginal health and lead to an imbalance in vaginal flora and pH, causing just unhealthy and not fun symptoms. So please take proactive care of your health and head to opositive.com/JOL or enter JOL at checkout for 25% off your first purchase. That's opositiv.com/JOL for 25% off. The avoiding him became more of an effort than facing it. And as I started to mature my understanding of just human relationships, I recognized that me running away from him was actually me running away from myself, because how was I ever going to grow if I didn't confront this? And then when I had a couple of relationships in a row that were, one that was abusive, a couple others that were not abusive at all, but just I kind of lost myself. And maybe you could say they were a little codependent and certainly not incredibly healthy for me, and I would get heartbroken. And then my marriage, where I was married to someone who shut down, whose moods were unpredictable, and I was replaying the drama of my childhood with him by not speaking up, not telling the truth, not having, hard conversations with him, where not only did I say what I needed, but I didn't even think about what he really needed, because I felt so victimized in the relationship. And I made a decision, and the decision was this: I did not want to be an adult woman with daddy issues. I wanted to heal. I wanted to have healthy relationships. And I didn't want to run away from this relationship anymore. I didn't want to run away from this problem anymore. So I decided that I was going to heal, and I put that in quotation marks, heal, to the best of my ability, my relationship with my father, that I was going to change the narrative to the best of my ability, so that I was no longer controlled by a story and by this narrative, and therefore I would actually have more control of my life and the relationships in it. So these are the steps that I took to heal my relationship with my father. And I wanted to just let you know that you can do this even if you decide to never speak to your parent again. You can do this and decide that you want to have a conversation with them that you've never had before. You can do this if your parent has passed away. They do not currently have to be in your life. They don't even have to be alive for you to do this work. But it does start with that choice of saying, I don't want to be controlled by this narrative anymore. And it starts with you being open to looking at things differently. So that was step one, deciding that you just don't want to be controlled by this narrative anymore. And then number two, deciding that you're going to look at it differently. So one of the most profound lessons that I have ever learned is that people really do what they can with the tools that they have. And sometimes those tools are not enough. And sometimes the lack of tools makes it so that we get hurt by them. It truly is never really personal. The way people treat us is a reflection of their conditioning. It's a reflection of how they were raised. It's a reflection of their beliefs. It is a reflection of their fears. It is a reflection of their internal state. So if my father, he was an infant at the time, but as an infant with his parents, they escaped Nazi Poland. And they were very close to going to a concentration camp, and they were able to narrowly escape that. And then my father grew up partially in Sweden and then in South Africa, never being told that he was actually Jewish until he was like 16 years old. And then he wanted to become a psychiatrist, got his education in South Africa, and then married my mom and came to the United States in 1968. That is part of his history. What's also part of his history is mental illness. The mental illness made him incredibly unpredictable. His culture made it so that he wasn't exactly like the warm and fuzzy father that I always, wanted, because culturally it just wasn't part of his culture and part of his upbringing. And then the fact, how narcissism begins, part of it is his parents made it so that he could do no wrong. They held him accountable for nothing. And maybe that had a lot to do with the fact that he was an only child and they narrowly escaped concentration camps. He could only do what he could do. And when I realized that people only do the best that they can with the tools they have, which includes you, I realized that whenever he would, be really hard on me or criticize me or be passive aggressive, it wasn't because I was not enough. It was because I must have triggered something in him. Imagine having all that and then having to parent. It's like if you don't have any way to regulate yourself and you're struggling with mental illness, how can you really, and you don't have the help that you need, how can you actually parent? This episode is sponsored by Parental. Here is a vitamin company that finally gets women's bodies. So whether you're dealing with hormonal symptoms, you're trying to support fertility, or you're just trying to feel good, Parental has something specifically designed for where you are. So no more generic multivitamins. And I love supporting brands that are redefining women's health. And Parental is leading that charge with their approach to vitamins. For too long, we've been stuck with generic one-size-fits-all vitamins. And the work is put on us to know what additional supplements we need to support our symptoms. Parental is in reinventing vitamins from the ground up. As the first OBGYN-founded vitamin company, they're defining a new era of women's health, one where your supplements actually understand your hormones, your life stage, and your unique needs. And honestly, it's about time. Exclusive for Jillian On Love listeners, new customers can enjoy 20% off their first order with code ONLOVE. Visit parallelhealth.com. That's PERLELHEALTH.com. Now, I had spent my whole life afraid of him, then hating him. And so I can easily focus on all the things that he did to me, my mom. I can focus on all his profound character defects, and I can get myself angry all over again. Or I can recognize that he was in a lot of pain, didn't know what he was doing, messed up, felt a tremendous amount of guilt later in life, because yes, some narcissists, it depends where you are on the spectrum, can experience guilt, and yes, they can experience love, because he wasn't a sociopath. That doesn't mean that I want you to stay around, not protect yourself from narcissists. It's just the reality of it. And that no one gets away with anything. We can't escape our subconscious. And my father did have a conscience. And narcissists are harder on themselves and have so much deep-seated, deep-rooted self-loathing that is so deep in their psyche that they don't even know how to even come to terms with that. It is so heavily denied. And then everyone around them has to bear the brunt of it. I can keep telling myself that, I had to bear the brunt of this. It's so not fair. Or I can tell myself he was in a lot of pain. And as an adult, I am no longer a child who needs to be afraid of her father. And so that is a profound step. You have to learn how to look at your parent through the lens of your adult self, because when the relationship is difficult and it keeps controlling us, it means that we are continuing to look at them through the lens of our child's self or our teenage self. And it's almost like we're stuck, frozen in time, looking at them through the filter of our past self. And then we wonder why we can't move forward, or we wonder why we're stuck in that anger or that frustration. And I found that a lot of people tend to make peace with their parents when their parents are very sick or very old, because we then finally see them as vulnerable. And when we see the vulnerability in another, it is hard for us to villainize them. Because when we see them as weak and vulnerable, we can't help but feel some compassion. And that is why a lot of people start to heal their relationship with their parents, like I said, once they're really old or once they're really sick. And that was part of what actually helped me. But as an adult, I had to learn how to relate to him differently, which means that I had to take responsibility. As adults in relationships, romantic or otherwise, the most important thing is that we are accountable for how we behave and for the way and the stories that we create and the meanings that we give to everything. I recognized that when we would have like conversations, when I started to let him back into my life, I was still sort of punishing him and I was still angry. So I went from being too afraid to speak my needs, so I would just shut him out and become completely avoidant and stonewall him and just completely, again, shut him out of my life, to then speaking my needs. But then I spoke my needs in such a way like, I'll show him, like, you can't step over this line. Right? So we tend to vacillate. It's like if we go from avoidance and then we start speaking up, then we can, again, become like, like so egoic, like we're kind of pounding our chest, like you can't cross me. The way for me to get in the middle where I was boundaried, where I spoke my needs and that I wasn't egoic and I didn't feel the need to like run away. And I also didn't feel the need to completely prove my point, was when I recognized that I didn't have to make him see anything from my point of view. I didn't have to get an apology from him. What I had to do was relate to him from my highest self. And what that meant was not let him trigger me so much anymore. It is completely understandable that he was very triggering to me, just like it's completely understandable, like you are maybe very triggered by something that your parent is or isn't or does or doesn't. We are still responsible for our triggers. And at some point, whether you're dealing with this in an ex-spouse, your parent, whatever it is, your coworker, at some point, we have to be able to say to ourselves, I can't let this get under my skin anymore. And if we continue to let it to allow it to get under our skin, of course we can understand why and we can validate ourselves. But at some point, where do we take responsibility? When does it become an us problem? The alternative is just to blame them, to be angry at them, to be frustrated at them. And then all you're doing is living out the same story. And then it's probably coming out in your romantic relationships, or it's coming out in back pain, or it's coming out in, chronic illness, or it's coming out in being too afraid to be in a relationship, or it's coming out in just stress in general. Remember, step one, you have to decide that you don't want to be controlled by it. This episode is sponsored by Thrive Cosmetics, my personal favorite. And now with fall upon us, I know some of you have some different routines. Some of you are maybe bringing out some soft blankets. Some of you might be swapping out your summer decor for warmer tones. Small traditions that mark the beginning of a season or the change of a season feel good. And I think that really includes updating your look, which includes your makeup look. With Thrive Cosmetics, every product is 100% vegan, cruelty-free, and made with clean ingredients that work with your skin, not against it. Their Liquid Lash Extensions mascara is incredible. Listen to this. It has 40,000 five-star reviews. That's like insane. And they have 6 shades that last all day without clumping, smudging, or flaking. I use it. My friends use it. My favorite makeup artists use it. It makes your lashes look extra long by wrapping around each lash from the root to the tip. And it's so easy to remove. So complete your fall look. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/Jillian for an exclusive offer of 20% off your first order. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/Jillian. This episode is sponsored by Masterclass. I love Masterclass. I love learning from the best. I just love mentorship. I love growing. And if you love it, this is for you. I learned how to make an omelet that literally tastes like you are in the middle of like Italy or France in a 5-star hotel. And I'm not kidding. And by the way, with plans starting at $10 a month, billed annually, you get unlimited access to over 200 classes taught by the world's best business leaders, writers, chefs, and more. And the classes really make a difference. 3 in 4 surveyed members feel inspired every time they watch Masterclass. That's a major stat. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/JOL. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/JOL. Masterclass.com/JOL. Number 1, I made the decision that I didn't want to live like this anymore. Number 2, I recognize that people do the best that they can do with the tools that they have. And that I had to kind of look at him as a human being, not just as my parent, and see if I could find some amount of empathy there. Number 3, I had to look at him through the lens of my adult self, not as my child self. So I didn't have to be afraid anymore. He couldn't actually hurt me. But I was so stuck, the body, quote unquote, keeps score and we remember things. And like I said, we get frozen in time and we keep having the same reaction to a parent because it's the reaction that we are so conditioned, we're so habituated to have. When you can decide to not have that reaction anymore by taking a deep breath, by recognizing that you can't change them, by recognizing that you don't have to convince them of your value anymore, and by maybe actually seeing that they are way more vulnerable than you ever imagined them to be, and they're actually more vulnerable than you. The next step I took is that I tried to actually focus on actually the good of all of this. Had I not had the father that I had, I would not be sitting here today. There's no way that I would be doing this. There's no way. I don't think you would even know who I was. I wouldn't be talking to you had I not had that as part of my story. So I give it a meaning, that it all has a meaning that's actually quite deep. And there's like a purpose to it all. And that this challenge that I had with my father really forced me to grow up, and to grow up out of the difficult child, grow up out of this whole narrative that I have about myself and about him, and really take ownership of my relationships and really take ownership of my life. And that to me is really profound. Something that I did throughout all of this, which I think will really help you, is you have to grieve the parent that you wish you had so that you can fully accept the card that you were dealt and hopefully see that by not having the parent that maybe you deserved, it built a strength inside of you, a resilience inside of you, a compassion inside of you. It forced you to grow. Maybe it informed you in how you want to parent. Have to be able to see some sort of empowering meaning in it all. If not, it just controls you. And so if you're watching this and you're on the fence with your parent, and maybe it's not a terrible traumatic relationship, but you just don't feel that close to them. Maybe you have to have a conversation with them and be the adult and reach out to them and lay, if it's safe for you to do so, lay all your cards on the table and listen to them as well. But you have to decide how important it is to you. You have to think about, like, if they were to die tomorrow, are there things that you would feel like very upset that you didn't actually get to say? And that conversation might be the hardest conversation that you ever have, but it might present an opportunity for the two of you to actually move forward. Because here's the thing. It's very possible that your parent doesn't feel good enough for you at this point. Or they're just so afraid to reach out to you. Or maybe they just don't have the same maturity as you, but you can still reach out. So reaching out to them and having or just having a difficult conversation with them might be really beneficial for you. And if you're someone who deals with abandonment wounds and like relationships have been tough because your relationship with dad or mom, or your attachment issues show up in relationships, reframing it and looking at everything differently really helps. It doesn't take away from every old wound that's living inside your body, but it does make it so that you feel more confident to be really honest in your romantic relationships and in all your relationships. And that's really the best that we can do. None of us are going to be completely free of all wounds, but if we can face it, and if we can start to look at it differently, and if we can start to release some of the tension and the anger and the frustration that we feel towards a parent, and start to open up our minds to maybe looking at it differently so that it doesn't have such a hold on us, to me, that is how we free ourselves. Maybe you've been on a career path that isn't one that you want to be on, but because you just feel like you have to, because otherwise you're going to disappoint your parents. Sometimes healing a relationship with a parent isn't about just healing a trauma or dealing with a narcissistic parent. Sometimes it's about having the courage to actually be an autonomous adult and live the life that you want to live and have that conversation with them, because a lot of times we're walking around trying to please our parent when really they just want us to be happy. The moral of the story is that we have so many stories and so many things that live inside our head. And if we don't investigate it, if we don't look at it from different perspectives, there are some stories that will just control us. And I really believe that in order to have healthier romantic relationships, we do have to make some sort of peace with a parent or with the story that we have with our parent, and recognize that if you had a parent who could not meet your emotional needs, it's not because you were not good enough. It's never because of that. It is always whatever they were able to do or not do is always a reflection of their internal state. But as adults, we have to step into a more collaborative role with our parents if we choose to have a relationship with them, and not make it all about our needs being met. We have to be able to speak up. We have to be able to take a deep breath. We have to be able to not try to change them and not try to be different for them, and just accept them as they are. And then maybe you can see a side to them that you never were able to see before because you were too closed off to seeing it. Anyway, this is a journey. It is a process. I hope this helps. I'm more than happy to do a part 2 on this. I want to hear from you. So please let me know what you think about this in the comments. Please write into hello@JillianOnLove.com. Let me know how this all resonated. And if there's anyone who you think could benefit from this episode, whether it's your brother or your sister or your best friend, please do not hesitate to share this with them, because you never know whose life you could be changing. And until next time. Jillian on Love is a QCODE production, executive produced by David Henning and Steve Wilson, produced and edited by Travis Howe, music by Will Tendy.